What's up everyone, Darcblade here with another Hunter's Guide to Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. In this video I'm going to be bringing you an endgame build, this time for the dual blades. Now as always, what are endgame builds? Well, they are builds that are constructed from the endgame equipment in the game. So basically, endgame armor, high tier decorations. They also feature curious crafting as well, although I always try to pride myself on not going for the absolute rarest of rare curious crafting augmentations. Now as always, if you find these videos helpful or informative, please consider leaving a like on the video as well as subscribing to the channel, as it does help and it allows me to bring you more videos like this. Now when it comes to the dual blades, they're a weapon that can really utilize the elements in the game, thanks to each individual hit being quite small, but having long and fast combos. It can rack up elemental damage against monsters quickly, so always take into account what monster you're going against and use the correct element. However, the downside is that the dual blades are a stamina reliant weapon, but with this build it shouldn't be a problem. As I present to you, the Blood Awakening dual blade build. This build utilizes skills such as Berserk, Strife, Blood Awakening and more to give you a build that is great at dealing elemental damage, can have infinite stamina and has survivability. So for this build you'll need the full primordial set, which includes the primordial helm, primordial mail, primordial vambraces, sinister grudge tassets and the primordial greaves. For your petalace, go with demon petalace for extra damage, or absolute petalace if you want some extra health. And then for your talisman, you'll need a talisman that has Berserk level 2 attached to it. Some extra decoration slots are also advisable. As for your weapon, this is an interchangeable dual blade build, so it can use any of the elements so long as the weapon you are using has a tier 3 rampage decoration slot, and extra decoration slots are also advisable. Personally, I would go with the Valstrax dual blades for Dragon, Almudron dual blades for Water, Magma Almudron dual blades for the Fire element, the Zenoga Onawa dual blades for Thunder, and the Kushala de Aura dual blades for Ice. So when it comes to the decorations, first of all I'd recommend going for critical jaws to max out critical boost. You'll then want to go for an elemental Bane rampage decoration to increase elemental damage against monsters. If you're using a pair of dual blades that don't have access to a rampage decoration slot at tier 3, you may want to consider upgrading it via the curious crafting. I've then gone for chain jewels to max out the burst skill, phoenix jewels to max out coalescence, jumping jewels for some points in evade extender, expert jewels for some points in critical eye, element exploit jewels to max out element exploit, crit element jewels to max out critical element, tenderizer jewels to max out weakness exploit, dragon jewels to max out the dragon attack. Remember, if you're using a different weapon with a different element, you'll replace these dragon jewels to match whatever new element you were using. So say you're using thunder dual blades, you'll replace the dragon jewels with bolt jewels. And then finally I've gone for a bloodlust jewel for a point in bloodlust. So if you've done what I've done here, you'll have a build that has fluctuating stats. By default you'll have a raw attack of 405, with a dragon rating of 112. You have 20% base affinity, but this can easily reach 100% when you take into account skills like Strife and weakness exploit. You also have fluctuating defense. By default it's 843. That is strong against water and thunder, but weak to the other elements, especially dragon. But like I said, these are fluctuating stats, and depending on what scroll you are using, the stats can change. For example, when you're in the blue scroll, your elemental damage is going to be much higher than it's shown here, which is the scroll we're going to be fighting monsters the majority of the time in. So first of all, you'll have Dragon Attack at level 5. Dragon Attack is a skill that increases the dragon rating and thus the dragon damage of a build. And remember, if you are using a different weapon with a different element, you will replace this Dragon Attack to match whatever new element you're using. You'll then have Critical Eye at level 4, increasing the base affinity of this build. You'll then have Critical Boost at level 3, increasing the damage of our attacks whenever they crit a monster, but only applies to the raw portion of an attack, not the elemental portion. You'll then have Weakness Exploit at level 3, increasing our affinity by up to 50% when we're attacking monster weak points. You'll then have Critical Element at level 3, which works similar to Critical Boost. Basically, Critical Element increases the damage of our attacks when they crit a monster, but applies to the elemental portion of an attack. You'll then have Part Breaker at level 3, which is kind of a byproduct of this build. It's not really needed, but it is nice. This allows us to basically break monster body parts more easily, which works in unison with the next skill, which is Blood Right, which when attacking a monster body part that is broken, a portion of the damage dealt to that broken body part is used to heal our hunter. This counteracts certain health drains like we receive from Bloodlust and Berserk. Next up is Mail of Hellfire, level 3, which is a skill that changes depending on what scroll we are using. When using the red scroll, it will reduce our defense but increase our raw attack. but whilst using the blue scroll, it will decrease our resistances but increase our elemental attack. And as this is an elemental build, we'll want to be fighting in the blue scroll most of the time to make the most of Mail of Hellfire. This also works well in unison with Berserk, which we'll talk about in a moment. Next up is Coalescence at level 3, which is a skill that temporarily enhances our attacks after recovering from blights or abnormal statuses. And this we've taken alongside 1 point in Bloodlust, as we can use Bloodlust to trigger this effect. When active, it basically gives us increased raw attack, elemental attack, and status build-up. You'll then have Element Exploit at level 3, which is a skill that increases elemental damage when we're attacking monster body parts that are highly susceptible to elemental damage. You'll then have Burst at level 3, which is a skill that when continuously landing attacks on a monster, which is very easy for the dual blades, it will gradually increase our raw attack and elemental attack. Next up is Blood Awakening at level 3, the namesake of this build, which, after regaining health by attacking a monster, which means this works well with Bloodright, we will gain increased raw attack and elemental attack. There is a separate video elsewhere on the channel if you want more information about Blood Awakening. Next up is Strife at level 3, another key skill for this build. Strife is a skill that increases our elemental attack and affinity depending on how much red health we have on our health gauge. On top of that, if it's 60% or more, we'll also gain infinite stamina. This works well in unison with Berserk, as Berserk basically guarantees that our health bar is red all the time, so meaning we normally get the full effects of the Strife buff. You then have Evade Extender at level 2, a quality of life skill that helps us dodge at greater distances, both good for defense and closing the gap on monsters. You then have Berserk at level 2, another key skill for this build. Berserk is a skill that when using a blue scroll, all our vitality will turn red and start decreasing gradually over time. But whilst this is the case, we cannot faint unless the red health depletes naturally over time. However, this drain over time can be increased and sped up by taking hits from monsters. You can counter this by switching back to the red scroll, but Berserk is a wonderful survivability tool, and on top of that, it allows us to make use of other skills such as Strife and Mail of Hellfire. There are two byproducts to this build, Paralysis Attack, which isn't really needed on this build, this is attached to my charm, as well as Muck Resistance, again a byproduct. Neither of these two are really needed. But the final skill is Bloodlust, which is a skill that gives us a modified version of the Frenzy Virus, a purple bar above our health bar which will gradually fill up over time. Whilst this is the case though, we'll gain increased attack and evasion capabilities as well as reduced stamina consumption. Bloodlust also has a negative downside of draining health from our health bar, which when coupled with Berserk is a little bit nasty. This is why we've only taken 1 point in Bloodlust. But should we let that bar fill up, will be inflicted by the full effects of the Frenzy Virus, taking more damage from a monster. However, you can control this effect through Null Berries or by dealing enough damage to a monster, in which case we fight off the effects of the Frenzy Virus, triggering Coalescence, and in doing so we will also recover any health that Bloodlust drained from us, as well as gain increased affinity. So there we have it, those are all the skills for this build. Let's quickly move on to the last section where we talk about the various curious crafting, as this is an endgame build. Basically, for the Primordial Helm, I've gone for a point in Mail of Hellfire. For the Primordial Mail, I've got a point in Hellfire and Muck Resistance. Muck Resistance isn't really needed, to be honest. For the Primordial Vambraces, I've got a point in Strife. For the Sinister Grudge Tacits, I've got another point in Strife. And for the Primordial Greaves, I got a point in Strife again. So there we have it, those are all the stats and basics of this Blood Awakening dual blade build. But every build out there has various pros and cons, no build is perfect. When it comes to this build, its biggest pro is its damage output, well, elemental damage output, able to bring down monsters quickly so long as you're countering them with the correct elements. The next pro for this build is the fact that it has infinite stamina. So long as we're managing our health gauge, we shouldn't have to worry about stamina whatsoever, which allows us to forego stamina based skills in our build in favour of damage based skills. And then finally, for the pros, is this build's skill synergy. Berserk, Strife, Coalescence, Bloodlust, Bloodright, Blood Awakening, Partbreaker, they all work well in unison with one another, giving us one of the strongest builds for the dual blades in the game. But there are cons. The two biggest cons is that unfortunately, the Berserk and Bloodlust health drain can be an issue for some players. And the final con is, unfortunately, for this build to work, you need a Berserk level 2 talisman, which is kind of hard to get as it's reliant on RNG. But If you're able to get all of this, then you're going to have one of the most powerful dual blade builds in the game in your hands. Like I said, all you have to do is make sure you're countering the monster with the correct element, and you'll be able to take on anything in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak with ease. But what are your thoughts? Please leave a comment down below, and until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you another endgame build, this time for the dual blades in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.